I'm now delighted to introduce our first panel discussion of the day on strengthening resilience to AI risk. Joining us on this panel are Rosamund, Powell and Ardi Janjeva, both research associates at CETaS, as well as Sébastien Krier, policy development and strategy manager at DeepMind. And moderating this session is Hushpreet Dhaliwal, Deputy Director for Defence and National Security at the Alan Turing Institute. Hushpreet, Rosamund, Ardi, and Seb, over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the opening panel session of the CETaS Showcase. So there's been some exciting developments in the world of AI over the last couple of years, but coming with that has been concerns over the manifold risks associated. So anything from risk to the economy, human agency, but also, of course, national security. In this session, we're going to be looking at some of the recommendations we've made in the past. So about a year ago, we launched a report in trying to support policymakers on how we might treat and manage those risks. And then we're going to turn to where we are a year on from the release of that report. An awful lot's happened in the last year, from changes in Whitehall through to the launch of a new institute, summits, and of course, onto Krier very shortly. And then we're going to close on some industry reflections and where we are in terms of looking forward to AI risks, so over the next 4 to 5 years. So with that said, just a round of applause for the panelists, please, just before we get started to open the session. So I'm going to hand over to Rosamund in just a second to kick us off, but each panelist has about 5 minutes. At the end of the opening statements, we'll hand over to you, the audience, for Q&A. You can get a head start via Slido, or perhaps you'll get started just as we conclude on Slido, and of course, hands in the room as well are welcomed. So looking forward to a vibrant discussion following the opening statements. Over to you, Rosamund.
Thank you. Is the microphone working? Yes, it is now. Perfect. So I'm just going to very quickly set the scene before handing over to the panel, which I think will be the most interesting bit of today's session. And as Hush has already said, this is based on research we conducted and published around a year ago. So in the lead up to the AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park last year, we wanted to do a rapid turnaround piece of research that brought a lot more structure to debate happening in government around a lot of hype around AI risk. We wanted to bring balance to that debate in 2 key ways. So the first way was a lot of attention was being paid to the more existential risks from AI, and we wanted to raise the profile of the near-term harms which might be happening already to marginalized groups in society and weren't so much risks as a reality for many. And the second was the emphasis on the UK leading the conversation on AI risk, and we really wanted to rebalance that on global cooperation and how more could be done to give everyone an even voice in this debate. So, the first thing we did was attempt to group risks that emerge from AI systems into the stage of the AI life cycle where they're most likely to emerge. And a few things are important here. The first being that even if you introduce all the necessary safeguards at the earliest possible phase of the AI life cycle, i.e. design, training, and testing, risks can still emerge later on due to deployment and use. So you can see this, for example, with the security of AI systems being fully addressed in a secure by design approach. That still doesn't get you out of iterative monitoring for malicious uses of AI systems once you've deployed it. The second thing is we took a slightly broader model of the AI lifecycle to many reports, looking to longer-term deployment and diffusion of AI systems and risks that don't emerge due to one AI system being deployed, but in the much longer term. So here there are things like risks to election security, which come about due to disinformation, or impacts on the future of work and workers' rights due to how AI is being deployed in the workplace. Throughout the report, we introduced specific policy recommendations, and these are broken down into 3 key categories. The first being creating more visibility and understanding of risks, so balancing that out between which risks need most urgent attention and why, and then secondly, promoting best practices. These are the 2 that I'd say most progress has been made on since we published the research. The third is establishing incentives and regulation. So what more can we do to hold companies account, hold governments account for the way they're using these technologies, and put in place more guardrails? Arguably here there has been progress as well, and in February the government did publish initial plans for AI regulation, but other countries, in particular the EU and US, are perhaps further ahead here. This is a very complex and detailed diagram, but what this does is detail all the different specific policy recommendations we propose into which stage of the AI lifecycle they target, and then also what the end goal is. Is it creating more visibility over a risk, or is it an incentive and a regulation? I'm definitely not going to go into all of these here today, but just to maybe give a little more context on the specifics we get into, we do recommend, for example, more deals with industry to encourage more transparency from them about what they're doing. And a lot of progress has been made on that with the AI Safety Summit and government making deals with frontier AI labs on safety. But that's really not enough, and that has to be complemented by more public engagement to understand how the public perceive and experience those risks. And that perhaps has been a bit more lacking from the current government. We also propose things like AI assurance. An AI assurance ecosystem is needed to robustly test AI systems prior to deployment and in an ongoing and iterative way. Again, significant progress has been made on this, particularly by the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit in government, publishing a portfolio of processes for AI assurance. What I've perhaps touched on less so far is how this all plays out on the global scale. Why is it so difficult for AI to be governed in a way that serves all countries? The first key reason why this is such a challenge is that the country of development is so often different to the country of deployment, meaning that if you are impacted by the downstream impacts of AI, you most likely won't have impact or power over the upstream design process, meaning it's really difficult to have an impact. The second being that the general purpose nature of the AI technologies means a sector-specific approach, which at least the UK government was pursuing for quite a while, doesn't really make sense anymore, and they have very much recognized that. And the last thing I'll touch on here, although there are others, is the disparate access and ability to shape incentives. We had a global AI safety summit, and it was really promising to see the diversity of experts represented, but I don't think it was enough. A lot of countries were represented, but one of the things I saw said again and again was perhaps you didn't have technical expertise from enough countries, even if you had political representation. So whether everyone has access to put their experts forward into this debate is very unclear, and the impacts of AI in different countries are playing out very differently. And finally, again, I won't go into this now, but it's perhaps something we can reflect on in the panel. In the report, we do set out specific criteria which would show the government have been successful, or others, academia, civil society, industry, have been successful in their attempts to address AI risk. And that requires asking questions like, is the debate inclusive of all the different countries who have a stake in this? Is it interdisciplinary? And is it adaptable? Because risks from AI are changing very quickly, and strategies to address those risks will need to be adaptable in the face of newly emerging capabilities. With that, I will hand over to the panel.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to start off by complimenting Roa's presentation there, by just reflecting, I suppose, on the kind of a half-term review of what we've seen 6 months since the Bletchley Summit, and how that's matched up against there was actually 25 recommendations in total, and if possible, I might just go back so that they're on the screen, yeah. And which of these kind of options that we laid out, we've seen some decent progress on in the last 6 months. So I'll go through a few for each of the kind of 3 columns that you see there, so creating visibility and understanding, promoting best practices, and then enforcing incentives and regulation. First off, just worth saying that I think the report card as a whole is pretty good. I think it's not often in government, UK government or government anywhere, where you have kind of a brand new institute set up from scratch, and it's got all these hires and things are moving quite quickly. And just in terms of the overall, the way that the discussion around AI has really gone mainstream, and government has been able to react and respond to that quickly and mobilize experts and different policy functions to respond to that. That's been a real positive. Reflecting on some of the actual policy levers there, one clear plus we can definitely say is on the model reporting and information sharing front. and that kind of evaluation ecosystem, which is really matured. We saw almost day one of the Bletchley Summit, the agreements that were put in place, UK AI Safety Institute and some of the big tech companies agreeing to submit their models for evaluation in the process of development and before being released. On top of that, DCIT, Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, has said that it plans to make its algorithmic transparency recording standard mandatory within government, and that, I think, marks good progress towards developing a more centralized and transparent record of government use of AI. So definitely lots of progress on that reporting side of things, which is a big plus. In terms of direct engagement with industry bodies, we've seen a fair bit of that as well. We saw I think the Frontier Model Forum is, I think, industry's kind of big play in terms of having a hub, a kind of coalition of industry that governments around the world can engage with directly. And I think the Frontier Model Forum are actually one of the founding partners of the US AI Safety Institute. So I think that's pretty good progress on that front. Although still maybe question marks as to whether an outfit like the Frontier Model Forum can outlast or kind of supersede the kind of inherent competitive instincts between the different companies that kind of make it up. So that'll be an interesting one to monitor as well. If we're thinking then about promoting best practices, pre-deployment testing fits quite nicely with the model reporting and information sharing that I already touched on. So that stuff has already begun, and AC has kind of been quite public about that. And that's all good, and that kind of post-deployment monitoring is also included in that. Developing public sector skills, again, closely related to that pre-deployment testing, because you can't do the pre-deployment testing unless you have that public sector skill base within a place like the AI Safety Institute. So we've seen that through a mixture of some really good high-profile hires from academia and also industry as well, and also growing partnership network, which has bolstered their evaluation capabilities. I think 20 or more organizations now working with the AI Safety Institute to that end. At some point, I think there will be a question as to whether we need government to be on the front foot a bit more in terms of defining what the best practices are rather than just promoting them. As that public sector skills base continues to improve, we might start moving into that area. So some good progress there. And just to finish up there in terms of incentives and regulation, I think Roa touched on this in her initial remarks. That's potentially an area where, in the UK at least, we are still waiting, I think, and we'll probably, until after the election, have to wait to see something more serious than that. But I think there are definitely noises coming out of places like DCIT that, putting AC's, the AI Safety Institute's access to AI models on a statutory footing is going to be that step forward and something that we will eventually see. But even legislation aside, we've seen lots of progress on things like the AI, or some progress at least on the AI assurance ecosystem. The Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which was renamed the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit, has published a new introduction to AI assurance and added some kind of case studies to their portfolio on AI assurance as well. So yes, slower progress on the regulation front, but there are bits and pieces which I think are part of that puzzle eventually leading up to that legislative action, which we can expect to see in the next year or two. And just finally, just reflecting on another point on that incentives angle, is investment in public compute and research resource. That's been gathering some pace, not just in the UK, but also in the US as well. The US National AI Research Resource. The UK has something similar with the UK AI Research Resource, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pounds going into that. And that's going to be exceptionally important if we think about who it is that has kind of access to compute and the ability to really be at the frontier of some of these developments. It's crucial that the UK is pushing more open access to academia and other researchers, and making sure that it can have a kind of competitive offering on the innovation side as well as the evaluation side. So those are just some reflections, I suppose, of kind of report card type approach. And I think Ro and I will be doing an article on this in more detail in the next few weeks, so you can look out for that.
Thank you so much, Ardi. And then over to Seb for industry reflections, as well as where we see the world going.
Yeah, I think, I think the mic's working, yeah. There's been a lot of kind of change in the past year. It's been a very kind of active domain, both kind of AI policy within kind of governments, but also within industry. And I think, a lot has been happening. So on the industry side, you may have seen kind of the various commitments we've made during the AI Safety Summit, but equally at the White House last summer. So that led to loads of work in terms of developing the right kind of evaluations, developing better internal and external red teaming exercises, and preparing better kind of documentation for the models we put out. And so, there's been quite a lot being invested on that front. And I think Ardi also mentioned the Frontier Model Forum, with which we're working very, very closely. So I think more should come on that front too. And same on the government side of things. I think it's been very impressive to see the UK lead on that front. I think the Safety Summit was truly successful, and then subsequently the work of the AI Safety Institute has been just generally very well received across the world, I think. So both within industry and other governments around the world. So I think a lot of really interesting, good stuff happening, I think, in the last year. And it still remains a lot more to be done. I think, gradually and progressively. I think the report Ardi mentioned and Ro presented goes over quite a lot of very interesting areas. I think two bits that kind of struck out to me were, firstly, the need for more visibility. I think, it remains the fact that things are moving very quickly. There's lots of stuff happening, being developed, lots of new research kind of coming out every single day. So keeping an eye on all this and how AI is actually being used and deployed remains, I think, a crucial priority. There's suggestions like incident databases and so on, I think that could be very useful. And equally, even on the more kind of day-to-day side of things, I think better data collection on how AI exactly is used within businesses, where it's being deployed, who adopts it, what kind of use cases are taking priority will be very important to help government better adjust and calibrate their responses over time. I think even like last month, the US Census Bureau released kind of new data on how AI is being used in the US for US businesses and so on. So seeing more of that kind of thing, I think here too would generally help. And the other bit I liked from the report as well was this kind of talk of red lines, looking at what are specific areas, particularly with regards to critical infrastructure, where government should be able to kind of think through what are the threats here and the risks, and what do we kind of try to stop and prevent. And there's another report we did Turing actually with Center for Long-Term Resilience, I think, in December, that really explored kind of the space of all possible kind of harms and threats in generative AI. I think is really worth looking at as well. I think in this space, you'll need both red lines on the government side, thinking through things like, think of the power grid or national, electricity supply or the nuclear deterrent. These are clearly areas where you don't want potentially loads of AI agents kind of running around. You might want a lot of human cognition there. And equally on the industry side of things, you'll want to have clear red lines in terms of, okay, what are the capabilities we see coming, on the horizon, and what does that then mean for our development practices, our cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. So basically, I think quite a lot to explore here, and happy to answer other questions as well.